what's up? My name is TechNoba here for Troubleshoot and welcome back to another quick guide. In this video, I'll be showing you how to optimize Call of Duty Warzone, specifically the newest Pacific update, to get you the highest FPS possible and of course the best competitive edge. This video is not going to dive into in-depth Windows optimization or graphics card optimization. Instead, you'll find those in the description down below to prevent me repeating myself and dragging this video on for an hour. You'll find Windows 10 and 11 as well as NVIDIA optimization guides and related guides in the description down below. Without further ado, let's begin. Now, first of all, the most important thing to do on any setup for any game is make sure that your Windows is fully up to date, as well as your graphics card drivers. Whether you choose to clean install them or slim them down doesn't really matter, as long as you're running the latest version of your graphics driver, and of course Windows is fully up to date, you're set. On top of this, should you be using Windows 10 or 11, well, I'm gonna leave that out of this guide. It's not really important. Use what you're comfortable with, as that's always going to be more important than the extra 10 or so FPS you could get from the one or the other. Now, before we get into any specific optimizations, let's head into the Battle.net launcher in order to optimize that for the best possible FPS in-game. I'll fire up the Battle.net launcher and click the Battle.net icon in the top left, where I'll then click Settings. Inside of here, on the App tab, simply look at the top where you'll see On-Game Launch. Change this from Keep Open to simply Exit Battle.net completely. This way, when you start playing the game, Battle.net closes and should no longer be taking up any resources on your computer. This window, after all, is technically a browser window, and of course, all the animations inside of it are going to take up your system resources. Speaking of, scrolling down to the very bottom, you'll see advanced features here. Use browser hardware acceleration. This setting in particular can give you better FPS in this launcher, but that's not really something that matters. If you choose to keep this window open, it will use some of your graphics card power, which is especially important to have in a game like Warzone. You should be turning this off to get this program to use more of your CPU instead of GPU, leaving more available for the game itself. When you see this window, simply click Restart Now, and Battle.net will then restart. When it relaunches, click the Settings wheel when you're on the Warzone tab and head into Game Settings. Inside of here, you'll see Game Settings for Warzone. Simply make sure that additional command line arguments is ticked, and then inside of here, type -D3D11. Then click up here where it says Install Location, hit Ctrl-A and Ctrl-C to copy this path, and then press Start and E to bring up a new file browser. We'll be clicking at the top, Ctrl-V or right-click Paste, and hit Enter to navigate directly across to where your game is installed. We'll be referring to this in just a moment. Inside of Battle.net, you can click Done and minimize this for now. What we're going to be focusing on is this window over here in Call of Duty Modern Warfare, wherever you have the game installed, whether it's C drive or another hard drive. Simply scroll down on the list here until you find modernwarfare.exe. Right-click this and then click Properties. Inside of this window here, head across to the Compatibility tab and make sure that Disable Fullscreen Optimizations is ticked. Then click Change High DPI Settings and make sure that this bottom tick box is checked, Application is selected, then click OK. Now, before closing out of this window, something a lot of users recommend is running this game as administrator. Though, note that by doing this, if you're not running, say, Discord as admin, your hotkeys in Discord will stop working. You won't be able to mute yourself. If you're a streamer with hotkeys to change displays, you'll need to run OBS as admin in order to fix that if your game is running as admin. So just keep that in mind. I'd usually leave this off, but some users find better performance with this turned on. Then click Apply and OK. If you're someone who uses DLSS, you can try and update the DLSS DLL in here, this one right here, nvngx.dlss.ell to the latest version, as this one here is slightly out of date. Though this could cause compatibility issues, and for that reason, we're not going to be deleting this file. Instead, select nvngx.dlss and change the name to something other than the original. Then in the description down below, head across to the NVIDIA DLSS download link. On this page here, simply look on the left-hand side and at the top of the list, click Download. Then select any server here and a zip will then download. Click on it to open it up when it's done, and you'll find the nvngx DLSS DLL here, which we can then drag and drop into the games folder. As such, now it should be updated. You can see the size is different, so something has definitely changed between these two versions. We're keeping this previous one, just in case something goes wrong, we can come back, delete the updated version, and rename this older one back. Now for something that's pretty important. I'll leave this window open and hit Start and E to bring up a new file browser. Inside of here, head into your Documents folder, which will be C users, your username, Documents, and then open up the Call of Duty Modern Warfare folder. Inside of here, open the Players folder, and you'll find adv_options.ini. Simply open this with any text editor. Now, inside of this, you'll find some options. What we're going to be looking at is the video memory scale. Change this from whatever number it is to simply 1.2. This way, the game can use as much as your VRAM as it would like. Now, on some older or lower power graphics cards, you may experience crashing or lower FPS, in which case, come and change this to 0.9. I'll set this to 1.2. Then, render work account is something that can give you better FPS. Usually, you'll set this to 3/4 of the total cores, not threads, in your computer. Opening up Task Manager with Ctrl-Shift and Escape, on the Performance tab, you can click on CPU, and you'll see all the threads here. And you'll see all of the cores, as well as logical processes here. Logical processes are threads, and cores are, of course, cores. I have 12, and 3/4 of 12 is 8. So I'll set this to 8, and save the file with Ctrl-S. If you're an Intel user, you should set this to half the number of cores you have with a minimum of 3. So 4-core Intel, 3, 8-core Intel, 4, 12-core Intel, 6, etc, etc. Do note that this is something that will be specific to your rig, and it should be something that you can come back and play with later, though usually pushing this higher than the number of actual cores on your computer can be problematic. I'll go ahead and save this file. If you find that this advanced options file changes its contents whenever you launch up the game, simply set the settings that you want with the game closed, right-click the file, Properties, and inside of here, make sure that Read Only is checked, Apply, and OK. Note that you'll have to uncheck that, Apply OK in order to edit it, and then simply change it back when you're done. Super simple. Heading back to the installation folder for the game, I'll click at the very top, and we'll be copying this address. The next step is incredibly important if you're on a laptop or a computer with multiple GPUs. Hit Start and type in GPU, where we'll be opening Graphics Settings. Inside of here, make sure that Hardware Accelerated GPU Scheduling is turned on, and then down here by Graphics Performance Preference, select Desktop App, and then click Browse here. Paste the address that we just copied at the very top, hit Enter, and then double-click on modernwarfare.exe. Then it'll be added to the list as Call of Duty Modern Warfare, click Options, and choose High Performance, then Save. Now we're done in this section here. Hit back in the top left, then Home, and head into the Gaming section. In here, under the Xbox Game Bar, make sure to turn this off unless you're someone who specifically uses Game Bar features. Then head across to Game Mode and turn this on for better FPS and performance in-game. Now, as many people know, when you're recording the game, you may drop a couple of FPS. And by default on some computers, Windows actually captures similarly to NVIDIA Shadowplay or AMD's equivalent. Usually you'll want to turn this off, especially if you don't use it. You used to be able to turn it off here, but instead you'll need to hit Start and type in Game, where you'll then be clicking on Xbox Game Bar. Don't worry if you don't have this. Then at the very top, click Settings and head down to Capturing. What you want to do is turn off Record in the background while I'm playing a game, exit out of this, and click anywhere to close the Xbox Game Bar. With that out of the way, let's get to cleaning up our hard drives and SSDs. Hit Start and type in Clean, where we'll be opening Disk Cleanup as administrator. Then select C drive, the one with Windows on it, and click OK. Wait for it to scan for temporary files that we don't need to keep, and when the window opens up, you'll see how many gigabytes you'll be saving down here. I usually leave everything ticked as I don't need any of these other than the recycle bin, which I'll manually empty later on, and thumbnails down here as I work with a lot of images and I don't necessarily want to wait for thumbnails to generate every time I go back to those folders. So with everything ticked except for these two, I'll click OK and delete files. Then a whole bunch of temporary files will be deleted, and if you haven't done this in a while, or ever for that matter, you could be saving yourself a ton of hard drive or SSD space. On top of this, if you're running the game on a different drive like I am, you'll need to relaunch it and rinse and repeat the exact same steps for whatever other drive instead of your C drive. Speaking of resources on your computer, you have a limited number of them, and the game can only pull from what's available. So, running less programs in the background will result in better performance in-game, stability, etc, etc. I'll open up Task Manager with Control-Shift and Escape, and inside of here, I'll head to the Processes tab on the far left. Then we can sort by CPU, memory, and GPU to see what program is using what on our computer. The more that we free up in the background by closing extra programs we don't need running, the better the game can perform as there's more resources available for it. When you're done with this, you may notice that you're closing a lot of the same programs each time you're starting up a game, in which case, head across to the Startup tab at the very top and sort by status. Everything listed as enabled starts up with your computer, and you can simply right-click, then disable if you don't want it to do so. You can start it up manually later. If you're an advanced user, you can head across to Services at the top, then click Open Services. Inside of here, we can follow the exact same steps, this time sorting by startup type, and everything listed as automatic starts up when your computer starts up. These services here, you can double-click on a service you don't need running and change it from automatic to manual. This way, either you or a program needs to start up the service in order to use whatever it provides for it to run properly. This way, you can save yourself quite a few extra resources that programs in the background can suck up. Speaking of, if you're a Discord user or someone who likes overlays, they could be costing you performance. Disabling overlays that draw over your game can be a good way to gain extra FPS and lower input latency. I personally find that the Discord overlay causes me quite a bit of input latency, and turning it off is something positive. You can get the same from disabling the Steam overlay, etc, etc. For laptops and notebook users, you should definitely try plugging in an external display, then closing your device's lid in order to disable the internal screen and using only the external screen. You could find that you gain quite a few FPS if your laptop is missing specific features that usually higher-end laptops have, such as a mux switch. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and fire up the actual game itself to get to some extra optimization steps. So, inside of Blizzard, I'll click Play. If you see a pop-up like this, click No, as we'll be customizing it later. If you see installing shaders at the very top, you'll need to wait for this to finish before we can get to playing and customizing the game. This, of course, could take a long time. Once the game opens up, head into Call of Duty Warzone Pacific, and then Options in the bottom left. Inside of here, you'll find Display Mode, which should be set to either full screen or full screen borderless. You'll notice a performance difference on one of these two on your specific computer that gives you better FPS. Usually, full screen borderless gives you better FPS than full screen in this game, which is a little different to the normal. As to why, I'm not entirely sure, but you'll need to play around with this, which you can happily choose while you're actually in-game to do direct comparisons. I find full screen borderless is better on my computer. Display adapter should be your best graphics card that you have in your computer. This will only really apply to you if you're on a laptop or a multi-GPU setup. Screen refresh rate you're usually not able to change unless you're in full screen mode, in which this should match your display's refresh rate. Scrolling down to render resolution, this should always be set to 100%. Anything below will make it blurry, and anything above will take away performance from the game. We'll get to customizing something similar a little bit later on. Dynamic resolution should be turned off, and we can ignore the next option. Aspect ratio should be set to automatic unless you need to pick something else here to match your display. VSync should be set to disabled unless you're receiving screen tearing as shown in the image here, as it will increase input latency if it's turned on. Custom frame rate limit you can have set to custom, and you can customize these options here. Usually the only thing you'll want to change is gameplay custom frame rate limit, and you'll only really need to do that if you're trying to record with something like OBS and you're receiving really bad performance in there, stuttering, etc, etc. Lowering this to just below what FPS you're getting leaves some graphics card available for OBS and programs alike to use instead. These other two options down here are really up to your preference. Scrolling down further, brightness and display gamma are both your choice and user preference. The NVIDIA highlights should be turned off for a little bit of extra performance on some computers. If you like what it does, you can leave this enabled. I don't see too much of a performance difference, though on lower end graphics cards or ones with slower hard drives, you may want to have this off. NVIDIA Reflex Low Latency should either be set to enabled or enabled plus boost, depending on what you prefer and what you get better performance results on. I usually just leave this on enabled, but you'll find more information on the right hand side here. Then at the very top, you'll find the Quality tab. Head across here, click Apply, and we'll start customizing these options. Field of view is completely user preference, though usually having this set to higher numbers will result in lower FPS. Camera movement is user preference, but scrolling down to details and textures, this is where things get interesting. Streaming quality should be set to low for better FPS, as having this set to higher favors texture quality over performance. You can claw back some of the quality by setting anisotropic filtering to either normal or high, depending on what you like. It makes them a bit sharper, and you don't necessarily need the higher quality textures from streaming quality up here. Texture resolution you can set to normal or low, depending on what kind of graphics card you have and how much VRAM you have. You'll see this in the bottom right. Usually, you can leave this as normal. Particle quality is something you will need to leave on high if you experience shimmering. You can set this to low, but if you experience distracting shimmering, you'll need to push this back up to high. Then, bullet impacts and sprays should be turned off unless you find it pleasing to see bullet holes, or of course you get a competitive advantage from it. It will give you a little bit of extra performance and should take less of your CPU. I'll leave this on just for the looks. Tessellation should be set to disabled, as it can improve visibility in some specific scenarios, looking over broken walls, etc, etc. Then dismemberment and gore effects, turn this off for better FPS, and on-demand streaming textures should be set to disabled. And on-demand texture streaming should be set to disabled. If you have this turned on, textures will be downloaded from the internet and used as you play. You can set a daily download limit and texture cache size in the advanced section over here, but it's a good idea to usually leave this off. If you find any issues with it on, you can clear texture cache down here. Scrolling down to post-processing effects, filmic strength I usually have off, though if you have a little bit of this, it can help video quality if you're recording, just because a little bit of noise does cause the encoder to work a bit harder. I'll usually leave this at about 20%. Film grain you should turn off for best visibility, and anti-aliasing you should turn off as well for best performance. If you absolutely need to get rid of jagged edges, you can set this to 1x. If you have it set to anything higher, make sure to disable filmic strength completely. Then depth of field, turn this off, as well as world motion blur and weapon motion blur for the best visibility while you're playing the game. Finally, shadow and lighting. The shadow map resolution over here, having this set to higher numbers actually gives you better FPS while you're playing the game. Though a side effect of this is that it does use more VRAM on your computer. So have this set to probably high, as it should give you better performance in-game. But you can of course turn this down if you need to claw back some VRAM usage. Then cache spot shadows and cache sun shadows should both be turned on for better performance. Then particle lighting, set this down to low, DirectX ray tracing definitely off, ambient occlusion you can set to off, and screen space reflection you can set this to off as well. Having these options set all the way down to the lowest should give you the best performance, especially ray tracing. Screen space reflections are something that some people like, so you may want to have this set to low if you notice too much of a graphic difference. Finally, click Apply Settings in the bottom left. Now, if you're someone who has DLSS, as I mentioned earlier, you can upgrade the game's DLSS by using a custom DLL file, but as well, inside of the options here, you'll find a DLSS setting. Unfortunately, on a 1080 Ti, I don't have access to this. You should set the quality as far to the right as possible for the best looking experience, and anything lower than quality will usually result in a blurry game, or things just not looking the way that they should. But that's really up to you and how many FPS you'd like to squeeze out of the game using something like DLSS. For the rest of us, however, if you have an NVIDIA graphics card, it doesn't even have to be RTX to get a similar effect. Something called NVIDIA NIS is a brand new feature that introduces DLSS-like features to all NVIDIA graphics cards. You'll find a guide for that in the description down below, and I highly recommend that as it can get you anywhere up from 20 to 30% extra FPS depending on what you set it to. For that, you'll be changing your display resolution over here under render resolution when you have it turned on. Though once again, you'll find a guide in the description down below. Other than that, there's not much else you'll need to change. If you're someone who has a gaming mouse, which more than likely you do, make sure to have the polling rate on nothing higher than 500. Otherwise, you could be using more CPU than you need. You really don't need a polling rate higher than 500, or even 400 for that matter. Other than that, you're fully set up for the best experience possible in Call of Duty Warzone. If you'd like to test, you can hop into a solos game just to test things out. You don't really want to play in anything more than solo, as leaving halfway through the match can be detrimental to other players. Just be polite. So let's go ahead and get a benchmark here to see how our FPS has changed. As you can see, with the default settings in the game, which are usually pretty high, I'm averaging around 20 to 30 FPS, which is making the game really difficult to play. Well, actually 20 to 25 on the low end. We can definitely get this much higher and more with a couple simple optimizations for sure. As you can see, after optimization, I'm easily reaching 60 to 70 FPS at 2K on my 1080 Ti. With something like NVIDIA NIS, I could easily crank that up to 80-90 FPS very comfortably. Finally, with this video reaching the 20-minute mark, we're officially done with this guide. If you'd like to know how to open your NAT type, do check the description down below. Once again, there are other guides to get even more FPS out of your computer, as well as the NVIDIA NIS guide, which I highly recommend for anyone to check out if you want an instant free performance boost. But anyways, that's about it for this long video. My name's been TechNoBehavior Troubleshoot. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Ciao.